Okay, so I've got my 3D model in Revit. So that's a plan view, of course, that I've got open, but you can see if I go to my 3D view, we've got the shop there sitting on the topo surface without much else around it. I do have the buildings nearby that I might bring back in later, but for now, that's all I need. I've got my 3D shop, and that's what I want to then take into 3ds Max. So the best way to export to go into 3ds Max is to use a camera, and so I'm going to make a new camera view, maybe starting out the front of the shop, and you can see there as I go to place my camera, it's disappearing when I go outside the crop region. This border there, that rectangle, is the crop region, so anything outside that border is hidden, but it doesn't mean that I can't click there to place my camera. So I'm going to click over in this space on the right. The camera's not visible, but it is there. And you can see if I move the cursor out now, I've got the field of view showing me the direction to the target. And then I'll just place my target near the back of the building, so it's going to see all of it.
So you don't go outside, just out the back?
Well, it's good to take your camera target a fair distance from your camera, otherwise it can crop it. But there's another alternative. If you notice that your views are cropped, and I'll show you what that means. So you probably all would have seen it when you end up with views that look like this, where it's cutting out the things in the background.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, happens to everyone. So, and it's because your target would have been placed too close to the camera. Now you can always go back into the plan and just stretch the field of view out. Sections are similar. So here I've got a section line, and if the section isn't showing everything, it's this depth, and you can adjust that too in the plan. Yeah. So same idea. But I'll show you another option with camera views. I'll just bring that back. So when you want to see a camera in the plan, you can right click on the camera and show camera. Right, so there's my camera again in the plan, and I'll use that to then crop it the way I don't really want it to, but just so you can see how to fix it. So there you can see it's cropped again. Now I could of course go back and just stretch it back out like I had it, but there's another option. Over here, you can just turn off that far clip active. So now it won't be clipped at all, no matter how far the field of view cone depth is. Okay, so don't worry too much about making the camera view perfect, but again, you should use a camera view to set up the export. So here I'm just adjusting the field of view a little bit to make it show what I want, but I'm also going to use the navigation wheel and maybe just pan to bring that down a little bit, and then maybe come back and just adjust the field of view a bit more so I can see the whole building. And then I'm going to right click on that view and then go to rename, and I'm going to call it Export 3ds Max. Then I'm also going to go into my render setup. So just clicking on the teapot, and you can see there it's on exterior sun only. I'm going to choose, because I've got some lights, I'm going to choose exterior sun and artificial. And everything else is okay, so I'll close that. And then, what else am I think about? Sorry. Oh yeah, sorry, I just should go back. I might even quickly do a test render, just so you can see how the lighting is. Okay, so there it is. Now, the lighting's all right. I actually don't mind that angle, but I'm going to go back to here and just show you, you can go to sun settings, and if you want to, you can adjust it, because it'll use these settings when we take it into 3ds Max. So I'm going to click on still and turn the ground plane off, and maybe I'll choose summer. No, I'll go for autumn. Autumn and spring are the same. And again, turn the ground plane off, click apply. And to see the angle, I'll turn the shadows on, and you can see that that angle isn't that great. So I'll go back to sun settings now that the shadows are on, and I'll duplicate that autumn equinox and have a guess at the time that maybe it's going to work well. And if you think about the location, that should give you a pretty good idea of the direction that the sun should be coming from. So hopefully you'll know if we're going to use the Vale location, you can of course use any location, but using the Vale location, the shot basically faces towards the beach, which we're going to say is east. Normally they are east on the east coast, not always, believe it or not, but generally they're east. And so, so the sun rises in the east, of course. So that means in the morning we'll get a decent amount of sun on the facade. So I'm going to try, let's say 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. So that's just the name that I've given it. And now I need to change the time to match that and do 10 o'clock. So there we are. So decent amount of sun, but maybe I want a bit more. So I'll try 9. That's maybe a little bit nicer, and then going even earlier in the day, 8 o'clock, when you'd have no customers, of course, but you're going to get a nice image. That might be a good angle for the sun. So, yep, 8 o'clock, that'll do. And then I'll just rename my sun setting. I thought you could right-click, maybe it's one of these buttons down here. Yeah, this one. So that will let me rename, there we are, and call it 9 a.m. Okay, so I'll save my file, because at this point it will sometimes crash. And then to go into 3ds Max, just go to File menu, Export, and then FBX. So I'll click there, then go to U Drive, 2019, this is just for me where I've saved my files. This one. So, you know, try and save it where you've saved your other files, but here I've got one for 3ds Max. But I could use the Vale folder. Again, it's up to you, but you just want to keep the files together. In fact, I'm going to make a new one for retail Vale 3ds Max. Yep. And then I'll click save.
So, you can put this on your computer, 3ds Max.
You can. It's free for students. Yep. Okay, so now I'll switch over to 3ds Max, and then on the File menu, go to Import, Link, FBX. Notice there is an option to link Revit, but I wouldn't recommend using it. It's better to link FBX. Yep. So let's do it again. So File, Import. Yep, and then link FBX. So then I'll browse to where I've saved that file. Open, and here, don't need to change any options, I'm just going to click attach this file. Okay, so then I can close this manage links, and then notice it does bring in the whole model. Even though I exported a camera view, it always will bring in the whole 3D model. So don't think that the camera view limits what you're exporting. It still will bring in everything you model. Now, to orbit, The controls are very similar to Revit, but instead of using Shift and using the wheel to orbit, you use Alt. So hold down Alt and then holding down the wheel, you can orbit just like you do in Revit. And then to set the camera view, or firstly, so I should say, zooming and panning is just the same as Revit, rolling the wheel forwards and backwards, holding the wheel down to pan, identical to Revit. But then again, to set the camera view to my viewport, it's best to use the shortcut C on the keyboard. So just the letter C, and that will set the same view that you've used to export from Revit to use in 3ds Max. So notice these things that have come up, they're all lights, and they are the lights that came from 3ds Max. The materials have come across as well. And because it's the same rendering program as used in Revit, the materials and the lights will basically work the same way. So, I'm going to show you though, if I go and just go to rendering and then hit render, it probably won't be quite right, because I need to still check one setting. Now don't worry about warnings like this. This is talking about far clipping, which is that setting I looked at in Revit, and it might make a difference, so that's fine. Okay, so we've got, it's rendered, but obviously it's not very good. The main reason is far too bright. So, to fix that, we go to rendering and then exposure control. And then best to hit render preview. So we can see the render in that little preview window, and then you get the chance to adjust the exposure value and see the result as you do that. So yeah, so now about 14, 15 is probably what you should have for an outside view. And then I will just go back to rendering and choose render. This time it can render properly. So even though it's the same rendering program as Revit uses, what's called ART, I'm just going to show you when you go to rendering and then choose render setup, it will show you that. You can see there, ART renderer, which is the same one you use in Revit. It's just that in Revit, it doesn't say that. It doesn't tell you what it is. But trust me, it is the same program called ART, just means Autodesk Ray Tracer. But when you go to the ART renderer tab in 3ds Max, notice how many more settings you get. And that's a good thing, because you can fine-tune the quality a lot more. And unlike Revit, where when you go, has anyone noticed what happens when you go from medium to high? It changes completely. So I would not recommend using anything higher than medium in Revit, because high is very difficult to work with, and you normally won't get good results with it. Medium's okay. So medium's normally good enough for test renders and just doing preliminary renders. Otherwise, if you want to go higher than medium, for now, I've been saying use the cloud. And the cloud will do some great things. It's like an automatic solution, and it does a lot of extra things for you, like putting in lights and balancing your render without you having to set it all up. So that's a great thing. And so definitely think about using the cloud. But again, the other option, you can take it into 3ds Max, and then again, notice you get this fine-grained control. High works, so here, if I go to high, it will definitely be better than medium, unlike in Revit. And also you get things like noise filtering. So if you get too many of these speckled things, you can have this extra noise filtering control, which will reduce that. You can also go to much higher resolution. There's lots of controls and options that you get in 3ds Max that you just don't get in Revit. So if I go for camera res, that should be good. And I'll just render again. It's going to take a little bit longer, but it will be much better. Okay, so that's just a brief intro to setting up a linked file from Revit to 3ds Max, and then looking at some of the rendering options that you have, and you can take it much, much further than this. But again, if you're wondering how they do all of these amazing 3D things that you see these visualisation artists do, lots of them are architects and interior designers who've specialised in that work, or have a look at some of the V-Ray demo reels to see some of the amazing things that they can do in film and TV, but this is the architectural one where they still do really high-end, amazing, interesting renders. Guarantee that's all 3ds Max. So that's great. You can see here it's still rendering, so it's going to take a little bit longer. I don't think I'll wait for it, but you can probably tell already it is going to be better quality than the ones I had before. So, just to give you an idea though how to take it further, you'll often then want to go back into Revit and change things and then bring those changes across into 3ds Max. So let's say I'm sick of these these panels that are the colours that I don't really like, and so I'm going to put those back to let's say this glass, so I've just chosen them and I'll set them all back to the glaze. There we go, and then what's another change? I'll just do some sort of geometry. Okay, so I'll maybe just put in a family or something. Use one of good old Max's. Max is the Chi library is made by this guy called Max. So he did have a lot of retail things. I'm just trying to think where he's put them. Maybe just furniture. That's not definitely. I was getting one of these. Too. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so I'll just put these cabinets maybe there for some sort of display or retail type fit out. So I hope they're facing the way I think they are. Actually, I'm going to go and look in perspective. Oops. That one. There we are. Okay, so, yeah, so that's the way I thought they were, so that's good. And then I'll just mirror those. That should be enough. Yeah. Oh, yeah, so they are. That's weird. Okay, so, oh. Doesn't want to nudge in that direction, so I'm just doing the plan. That's a weird setup in the plan, but it's going to be, I think, still good in 3D. That'll do. Okay, so I've made my change, and so now I'm going to go back to that Export 3ds Max view. You can see my changes there. Yep, that'll do. So really important, I'm going to save the file before I do the next thing, because again it may crash when I go to do that. But then again, File, Export, FBX, and I'm not going to change the name, so I'm just going to click Save and say yes when it asks me if I want to overwrite the previous file. And then into 3ds Max, it's stop rendering, hopefully, yeah. So I'll just go back to the file menu, but this time go to Reference and then Manage Links, and then go to the Files tab, and you can see the one that I loaded previously. So I'm just going to select that and then click Reload, and then OK. Oh, yeah, and just OK. And then straight away you should see the changes. Oh, now did that come through? So what's going on there? Oh, I didn't choose the same. Did I choose the same folder? Let's go with. Or am I just not seeing? Oh yeah, so it is there. I just couldn't see it. So there, so you can see it there. There's my cabinet, and so I just used some shortcuts to change the view. But oh, now they're not working. What's going on? Okay, so yeah, so just my glass wasn't that see-through, but the cabinet you can see there. All I did was go to wireframe, and then you can see the cabinet is there. So we know the changes have come across. And then when I go to render, of course, well, we may not see it because the glass is pretty reflective, but you'll at least see that the materials for these parts have changed. I forgot to do the green bit, so that was one that I missed. But I can, of course, go back to Revit and change that, and then reload the link. Now, I haven't got time to go through materials, but you've got a huge number of materials option in 3ds Max that you don't have in Revit. So you can always use the Revit materials as a starting point and then take them a lot further using the material editor in 3ds Max. And then, just like materials, so it's this button up here that has a sphere, or sometimes the two spheres. But it's best to start with the first one. So when you hold that button down, the first option there is the compact version. The other one is a bit more involved. So that's the big one. That's the new slate one. But the better option at first for you would be the first one there, which is the compact editor, which is this one. So yeah, so just like materials, lights have a lot more options in 3ds Max than they do in Revit. And that can be a really helpful thing because in Revit it uses essentially real-world lighting units. So that means that the lumens that you set in the light are meant to be similar to what you would use in the real world. But sometimes, particularly if you're saying try to do a render where you've got sunlight and artificial light, you'll find that it's very difficult to balance those things because the sunlight will overwhelm all of the artificial lights. Okay, so in 3ds Max you can easily customise all the light settings. And so here, if we go to shaded display again. Right, so you can actually see the lights in real time. So notice how we've got the sunlight there. And then if I was to, well, I'll even just make a new light, just to give you a basic idea. There's lots of things you can do. So I'll just make a light here that is outside the building. So notice we can already see the effect of that light on the ground. We'll give it a second to wake up. Just give it a second. Yeah, I've lifted it up a little bit so it's not there anymore. I'm just going to turn the target off and then we might see it again. Maybe it's a bit clear. Here we are. So notice how when it gets close to the ground I can actually see the light. So that means it's real time. So we can see the lights in real time as you work in the viewport. So if I increase the brightness there, we'll actually see that. You can see there how the lights getting brighter on that ground plate. So again, I haven't got time to go through all the options you've got for materials and lighting, but there are a lot more options in 3ds Max than you have in programs like Revit. But that's still not even all the program can do. So it's got a lot more options for modelling than programs like Revit as well. You can model basically anything that you can think of that exists in the real world. I taught a 3ds Max course a few years ago where We had some people who wanted to do medical models. Like, so they're modelling blood vessels and then all of the cells and things in these blood vessels that they wanted to have for their medical animations. And we did that all in 3ds Max. And you can do, again, virtually anything that exists in the real world, you can make it. And that can be a really powerful thing. So a huge number of rendering options, fluids, again, anything, particle systems. So it's a really powerful modelling program. And maybe I'll just give you one little...
Like a waterfall?
Absolutely, yeah, you can. Yeah, so that'd be probably a mix of fluids and particle systems, but yes, you can. Yep. Now, I would, if you need to do waterfalls, I wouldn't recommend going straight to this program. I'm going to show you Lumion in a minute, and that will give you other options. But maybe just to give you, what I wanted to show you was people. So you have, so I'll go just use biped. So as I've shown you, it's, this program is used for all sorts of really high-end animation where you have 3D people that look like real people walking through the spaces and in film and everything else as well. So of course there are tools for that, and one of them is this biped tool, which is there to help you create animation. And so that can be, again, a really, really powerful thing. But just to give you an idea of the process, I might just, sorry, it's taking a minute because I've set display really high. So I'm just going to reduce that down, and then I can maybe get one of his feet. Oh, that's not selection. So here we go. So we've got all the different parts of the body there, and you've got complete control over that. They've changed the hierarchy a bit since I used this last. So I need to go and find where the feet are. Previously, you could just select the feet. I don't want to spend too long on this, but I just want to give you an idea of the process and the fact that it can be very involved. So if we get a view where you can see the front at least, so that's is it? Oh yeah, it might. Yeah, sometimes it'll overload it when we do this. So it's here. Me being stupid. I forgot I changed this. Okay, so there we are. I just did something stupid. All right, so I just want to show you one little thing. When we start to move the different body parts, they're all linked together using this thing called inverse kinematics, really. So it's a skeleton that is set up to move the way we do, and that is, of course, extremely useful for animation. So you can make the person do whatever you want and animate any sort of movement. And that's great. So you've got total control. But then imagine if you want to have different 3D people attached to that skeleton, you've got to go and do what's this thing called rigging. So you tie the mesh of the skin to the skeleton, and that in itself is a huge process. And then setting up the animation, even though there are automated tools for it, again, it's a bit of work. And so that's why people who specialise in this tend to do that sort of work. Yeah, it is. It's a lot of work. So don't just leap into 3ds Max as your first protocol for that sort of animation, because there are alternatives like Lumion, and that's what I want to show you next. I just want to give you a bit of an idea of that process, and then it hopefully will make it a lot clearer why Lumion and alternatives to Lumion like Twinmotion, that's another great one, and Enscape. There are a few programs like that that essentially automate that whole process of going from your Revit model or even SketchUp to creating better renders, but also 3D animation. Because as you can probably tell, it's a very, very technical process using the really high-end programs like 3ds Max and Vale together takes years and years. And also I've been studying it for over 20 years and I'm still learning about those things, and it just takes a lot of time. So I'll finish the video for that there, but again, this will give you the steps if you do want to try using 3ds Max. I'm not trying to discourage you from using it. It would be great actually if some people do use it, because it does give you modelling options that Revit doesn't have, and also rendering options. And also you can go still from 3ds Max if you decide you want to try Lumion. You can go from 3ds Max to Lumion instead of going from Revit to Lumion. So you've got those two alternatives.